Hi everyone, Chris J. from Blue Coat Foundation. On this episode, I sat down with Christian Wecker. He's with the LAPD and he authored the book titled The Ticket. I read this book and I could not put it down. I had so many moments where I'd nod my head as I read. I was just cheering for the good guys and totally submerged in the plot. After the read, Wecker agreed to sit down with me for a podcast. We spoke about his book and dove into several topics he covered in it as well. I had a great time talking to Wecker, and I highly suggest you purchase his book, The Ticket. Wecker is a genuinely nice gentleman who's a wealth of knowledge and experience, and best of all, what I personally appreciated about him the most was how much he supports the everyday street cop. I hope you enjoy and get value out of this podcast.
I remember going to a TC at Crenshaw and Florence. One of my buddies, a guy named Dom, was there. You could hear it in his voice that something was bad. We get there and it was a minivan upside down, kids ejected, family burning, mother and father burning inside, that kind of thing. Kids on every corner, and it was just absolutely etched into my brain. Things like that happen all the time. You and I both know, you spend a lot of time on patrol, particularly in a division like 77th Street, you see a lot of death, and everything from SIDS to naturals and everything in between. So you kind of become inured to it, but it does, every once in a while, something sticks along. But, as fun capers, I have so many, pursuits and just doing things with my friends and really and truly some of the funniest things that I remember occurred on patrol. I remember one night my old partner, Hal Jones, and I responded on the backside of what used to be Pepperdine, now it's Christian Crenshaw Center. Little old lady, horseshoe-shaped apartments. Little old lady called and said that somebody was trying to break into her place. So we went up, knocked on the door, and my partners, we were backed up by guys Tim McLaughlin and John Calzada, came to back us up. And I answered the door, knocked on the door, and the lady answered. And she opened up the screen door, and she had a pair of scissors in her hand. This lady must have been in her mid to late 80s. And I told her, so, it's okay, sweetheart, the police are here, you can go ahead and put down the scissors. I'll be damned if she didn't spin them around in her hand, like into a stabbing motion, and reached out with her kind of a left-handed claw and said, come here, you dirty motherfucker, and tried to stab me, yeah. I screamed and jumped back and slammed the security door, and Calzada and McLaughlin started laughing. And the lady apparently on the other side of the horseshoe was watching us through her own security door, and she said, "Yeah, Miss Johnson's a little crazy." And I was so shook up. We went around the corner and sat there and had a smoke and relaxed. But just that kind of stuff happened, all the time. And I know that's probably it's not a super story, but
no, sometimes it's it's weird. We do see so many things, but it's these off stories that stick in our minds sometimes.
For sure. Yeah, no. It's the day-to-day. That's the thing, is that's why I loved patrol, and I still miss it to this day. When you make sergeant, you kind of stop having the fun, and when you make watch commander, it's over. Once you take a rocker and above, your days of fun are gone.
From an early age, people always told me being a P2 patrol is the best time of your life. So why promote? And it's different for everybody.
No,
right?
no, for sure. I worked for one too many shitty supervisors, and I got to the point where I was just like, and I took the sergeant's test every 2 years, but I never studied, and I always, would go into the interview and tell them what I would do as a sergeant. Instead of telling them what they wanted to hear, I would tell them what I wanted to tell them. And so I'd always banned, band 17. Then 2 years later, band 15. I'd go down 2 bands every 2 years, you know. And then 1 year, I got in a whole bunch of trouble. I'd taken a 10-day hit, then a 7-day hit. I got admin transferred to Wilshire for re-education, and I had a conditional OR that said I couldn't threaten another lieutenant for 5 years. And, you know, I showed up at Wilshire, worked morning watch for the 2 years I was there, had a great time in Wilshire. I'd never been north of the 10 freeway, so it was a whole different experience for me. And everybody told me, don't bother taking the sergeant's test. And I was like, you know, I'd take it every 2 years. I'll just take it. So this was a year after, like less than a year that I'd been in trouble. I took the sergeant's test, and next thing you know, I walk into the interview, and it's my old lieutenant, Tony Otto, and my old vice sergeant, Michelle Loomis. And all of a sudden, I'm in band 3 with,
wow, all right.
Yeah. With only 7 people in the whole department scored higher than me. So
There you go.
yeah. But why? It was just, I don't know, it was just time. I probably should have done it 10 years sooner, but
Yeah.
it's the way it works.
Yeah. Got over 20, haven't promoted yet, kind of by choice. At least that's what I tell myself.
Yeah, no, and I get it, man. I mean, it's funny because people, you know, I did 20 DPs in the building as an administrative sergeant on the 10th floor at CTSOB. And, you know, people really, truly believe in the administrative world of this department that if you are on patrol, you're either a sucker or a dullard.
Oh, we're going to go over some of that stuff. I wrote those stuff in my notes.
Yeah.
But I do think that cops are like some of the best storytellers ever. Storytellers.
Yeah.
You know, later in your career, people are starting to retire and you hang out with them. And it's like our currency for life, the storytelling. And we say it so well. And reading your book, The Ticket, it felt like it was an easy read because it felt like it's for a cop. And every chapter was like a different caper.
Yeah.
And then it really kind of all tied in really well together at the end. It was really nice. Tell me about the process of writing. When did you want to start writing? And how'd you put it together? How'd you come up with this concept of how to tell the story?
Well,
I'm sorry to interrupt.
No.
I ask because so many cops say, you need to write a book, or
Sure.
cops are like, I'm going to write a book.
Yeah.
And myself, I've been thinking about writing a book for years.
Yeah.
But it's so daunting, right? I don't know how to approach it. So what was your process?
I don't know if I'm any kind of an example in that regard.
Well, you got this thing.
Yeah, I
Book,
suppose.
so
You know, it's funny, like you said. I mean, everybody, you know, cops tell great stories at parties, and people can't believe, you know, what we do for a living. I've always said this is the most exciting job on the planet, and it's a noble profession. And I've always believed that. And realistically, you know, all cops say, you know, well, not all, but a lot of cops say that, you know, I should write a book, and people tell them they should write a book. And all of us are authors. That's one of the things I talk about all the time, is that, you know, I've been writing short stories for 30 years in the form of arrest reports and crime reports, which is essentially what they are, short stories. And I always tried to make them as enjoyable for the DA as possible, you know. But as far as writing this book, I really and truly just sat down and started. I didn't have an outline. I didn't have any sort of a plan. And, you know, I really just started telling stories. I had an idea. I had an overall idea of the concept of the book, but I really just kind of sat down and, you know, I'd try and discipline myself to write 1,000 words a day, which was difficult and not always successful. But, you know, I'd write the story, and the story kind of took itself over. It was very episodic. I mean, it's, you know, I like the episodic police stories. You know, all of Wampa's early stuff was episodic. You know, Choir Boys, New Centurions, all those were just, seemed like to me to be war stories. You know? So that's the direction I did. There was no outline or anything.
Did you have did you start with the end concept?
No. The end wrote itself at the end.
Because the way I write is I just go. And at the end, I'm like, oh, I wrote a cool little story, right?
Right.
And it just comes out. Is that kind of what happened with you?
Yeah, very much so. I mean, and, you know, I would write a chapter, and then I would run it by L90 and have her see what she thought about it, and then of course distrusted everything she said because I always figured she would be the one that would be lying to me about how good it was. But
So how long did it take to write it?
that's kind of a hard thing to figure. I probably took about a year to write, I would say. And then, I actually spent a lot of time exchanging emails with Joseph Wambaugh and asking him, how do I get published? How do I do it? And he gave me a bunch of great advice. I send out, probably 100 query letters to publishers, and he pointed out to me that publishers won't take a chance on a new author. They just won't. And the suggestion was, he finally hooked me up with an old guy in New York, a guy named Otto Penzler.
Okay.
But he was not interested in publishing. He was old and it was kind of out of the game. And I just gave up, and it sat in my thumb drive for probably 4 years.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And then my wife just decided she was going to publish it.
So what does that mean? And I'm asking you this for other cops who are thinking about it, right? What does that mean to publish a book?
Well, I mean, there's a huge amount of self-publishing that goes on now because technology has advanced
Right.
so high that, like I said, realistically, the book publishing business is a business, and unless they can sell a million copies, they're not interested. They need to make money.
Like a record company.
Exactly.
Much. Okay.
Yeah. And self-publishing is essentially like putting your song on Spotify or something and just releasing it to the public to be observed.
I guess I'm asking, how do you create the book, physically?
Oh,
I
think
what were the steps?
Well, my wife used an app called Book Baby, I think, and she just submitted it, and then it comes back. And I had already had it content and line edited in anticipation of trying to publish it in the traditional route, and so the book was pretty tight by itself. It had been line edited and again content edited, so it was a pretty clean copy when we put it out electronically.
So that app pretty much helped you put it out there.
Yeah, you go through, and there's a bunch of different ones. She, in all fairness, like I said, she did all the research, but Book Baby is the one she decided on, and because they work with Amazon and Kindle apps and all those kind of things.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Huh. And how much of this the storyline here is personal venting?
Probably the whole thing.
Yeah.
Excuse me. Yeah, it's I wrote it as a policeman for policemen, and
right.
There was for the time period that was the early to mid 2000s when I had some of the best times in my career, and I wanted guys that had lived that life, the coppers from Southeast and Southwest and Newton and 77th and Rampart, to see themselves in it, really. That was kind of my goal. Yeah.
You definitely do a lot of explaining of terms, but later on, some of it. And I caught that. Have you got any feedback from people not in the police world? And some of it, I was trying to read it as, not the whole thing. I got really involved in it. I was in your book. I was in there with you. And I thought to myself, well, what would outside people think about this? What kind of opinions did you get on that?
Yeah.
And did you care?
No, and realistically, I didn't care. I've had a couple of civilians read it and talk about, it's got a lot of inside baseball. What I've discovered through talking to more people that are not cops that read it, that's actually one of the attractive things for people that are into this type of genre, that are into the police genre, that they like the inside baseball explanations because it makes them feel that they understand what's being said. And LAPD's got a million acronyms and jargon and all those kind of things that a lot of which needs to be explained or it wouldn't make sense.
Yeah. Oh, interesting. I really like the way you instead of giving characters, giving them their real name, you just nicknamed them for what the situation was.
Well, that's kind of what we do. I mean,
Yeah.
your cops get nicknamed from their deeds. I can think of 100 funny nicknames
Yeah.
from based on things that coppers have done. It's
Yeah.
just like real life.
Right.
And everybody else in every other business, people get nicknamed based on their behavior.
Yeah. If we go over everything, I kind of put notes on this book, we'll be here forever. But on chapter 18, Pat and Sterling,
Mm.
I wanted to read something that really stood out for me and just kind of get your little idea on it or your, what was in your mind at the time, right? He'd been cultivating loyalties both inside and outside of the department for several years and had a formidable army of sycophants that he could rely on to help keep him in power. He definitely knew where the bodies were buried. The big chief hated him, but was forced to keep him at his post because of his political connections, mainly to the Council District 8 down in South Central. And it goes on and on.
Mm.
Just 3 little sentences like that had me stop. Like, yeah, he gets it. And it almost got me more frustrated. I feel like I'm in this washing machine of frustrations here, right? So when I read that, do you think people in power in our own company, if you will, do you think they're self-aware? I see that there's a disconnect between higher ups and patrol cops, even those that are our friends that we've seen promote throughout the years. Whether we see them change or we saw that in them or not, you know what I mean? That's been a big part of the frustration. A lot of times with the discipline, and you capture that really well here in a fun way. I guess my question is, do you think, like, this is a book you vented here, and now you're in a position to help coppers in a different way? Do you see if is there a fix to that? Are we doomed? Is there a part of that relationship that's just needed?
I don't know. I think in public sector entities, politics is a huge part of the upper echelon. Private sector, I think there's office politics in private sector, but private sector is infinitely more merit based than connection based. Yeah, you might get your foot in the door in private sector with connections, but if you fail to perform, they fire you. Public sector is different in that way, and it's one of the things that I think is really damaged the LAPD, where we got away from leaders like Jim Tatro and Mike Hillman and B. Gramala, whether people like her or not. I mean, B wasn't given anything; she took it, And I think that we moved politically to a point where connections had more value in the upper echelons of the LAPD than skill and merit and leadership capabilities. Bratton recognized that and immediately downgraded people and elevated others. I mean, the time of Bratton, Mike Hillman went from Captain 1 to Deputy Chief, and Shannon Papa was up to a Deputy Chief, and Sharon Papa was a phenomenal leader. But then we went right back to, Charlie and Moore, and that was essentially going back to Bernie's style of leadership. So I don't know. In the book, I just simply tried to capture the perspective of the field officer of the 10th floor.
Yeah. So who has it wrong?
Probably a little bit of both. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm not the person that believes that all command officers are bad. I know many command officers personally, and it's been my experience, especially from my time on the 10th floor, that the vast majority of them are simply normal people like you and I that are existing on almost impossible circumstances trying to do the right thing. There are people that are truly evil, and there's people that are truly wasting oxygen. But the vast majority of the folks, in my belief, in levels of command, are really honestly trying to do what they believe to be the right thing, but they've been so poisoned by the machine And then conversely, I'm obviously hyper loyal to the P2, but there's a quote from it's from a writing called A Message to Garcia, and I don't have it in my notes, but it's from a writing called A Message to Garcia, and it's about the Spanish-American War, and essentially the president needed a message to a rebel, Garcia, on the island of Cuba, and they found this lieutenant who was basically didn't ask any questions. He took the letter, they dropped him off on a boat, he found his way, and 2 weeks later he delivered the message and he came back. And the point of it is that the value of an employee that's willing to go to work and recognize that hard work is endemic or an indication of your loyalty and those kind of things. And one of the things he talks about is that that all great men are not rapacious and out to screw the working man any more than having worked for a living is any sort of an indication of nobility either. So there's good and bad people on both sides. There's bad P2s who are wasting just as much oxygen as a bad command officer. Statistically, probably more because the commander 100 people and we're 8,200. But the fact that you work the field is no indication of nobility any more than the fact that you're in the command is any indication that you're bad.
Just kind of embedded into culture more than anything.
Yeah, I think so. And I mean, police officers are very much like you read about. I was never in the military, but you read about soldiers and Marines and airmen the time-honored right to bitch and moan of the working officer. It's cops are bitch and moan specialists, and the only thing they hate worse than the way things are is change. So. Yeah. It's, but at the end of the day, I always go back to the 13th management principle of the LAPD, which is that the line officer is the only person in the organization who performs the duties for which the police were created. Everybody else is support services. And that's
I
my
think
firm
it's
goal.
Patrol and detectives.
Yeah,
right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
But broken down further, when you consider detectives, if your patrol officers aren't booking bodies and taking crime reports, they don't have any work. So, that's not to say that, that's tabletop detectives. There are detective units that are high-speed, low-drag that go out and find their own work. But the patrol officer is the only person who does the job for whom the police were created, which is call the police, they come to your house and solve a problem.
Yeah. I read this, I don't read much, but I did read a book twice. It's amazing. I hope I pronounce it right. The Hot Gates of Thermopylae, based on the Spartans, 300s.
I'm familiar with the story, but I've never read the book.
You saw the movie?
I think I did, yeah.
You should read
I don't watch too many movies.
You should read the book.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just... obviously, we can't bring the Spartan life into police work,
sure.
But the levels of leadership and insights are pretty badass in that book. So just based on everything you've, from your experience, we talk a lot about leadership, and I don't want to be too negative, but I don't really see much of it. I feel like the machine, as you say, is not designed for leadership to shine much.
Yeah, I agree.
In this department, or just in general here. What kind of leadership do you think we need to better the culture and to kind of, the us versus them, meaning our superiors, lessen that or bring us close together?
It's funny because I'm a history nerd. I've got a degree in history from UCLA, which is completely, utterly useless. But it does give you perspective.
Yeah.
And my particular area of interest is British naval history from about 1780 to the end of the Napoleonic War in 1815. And one of the reasons I like it best is because of the leadership lessons that were the English at that time were the best in the world at leading from the front. The British naval philosophy of leadership was firm but fair. And, if you ever watch Master and Commander, he talks about that. He talks about Patrick O'Brien is one of my favorite authors. And he talks about, you never make friends with the foremast jacks, meaning the guys that did the work, the average sailors. For a leader, you can't be friends with them because they will despise you in the end. But at the end of the day, you must be firm but fair. And I think that's not an unreasonable application. I think the applications to leadership are timeless and universal. And for all the guys in the military, they all say the same thing. The people that they would die for were not their buddies, they were their leaders. And obviously they would, die for their friends too. But the leadership that they respected most were people that were firm but fair.
Yeah.
And I think that comes down to, in our organization, is a question of empowering sergeants and lieutenants to be allowed to make decisions, and more importantly, be allowed to make mistakes that don't end their careers. And I never worried about that particularly because realistically, I never expected to make sergeant. So when I made sergeant, it was all gravy from there.
Yeah.
But I never, I wasn't the sergeant that called the watch commander and asked permission to do something. I made a decision, and we executed the decision. We solved the problem, and then I stood by my decisions. And I think we need more of that. But that comes with tenure and experience as well.
How much do you think affects the ability for that to happen here, where people promoting to these higher spots are our friends who are on patrol with us? Are they, because of that dynamic, you think are we still able to get there?
Yeah, I mean, again, I hate to keep going back to the military, but we're a paramilitary organization. Right. And, there was, people came up through the ranks. There were battlefield promotions. I mean, we're essentially one big giant battlefield promotion. You take a test to move up.
Yeah.
But you move, you don't command the people that you came up with. Although, you keep finding them and they keep coming around again over the years. But I don't think it's a question of not willing to be friends with somebody. You could be friendly with people and treat them with respect but also hold people accountable for their behavior. I don't think that's crazy. And no. I don't personally think that cops are worried about that. They're not afraid of that. I think the biggest problem is in this organization for the entire time I've been here, really, for the last 30 years, is that if you make a mistake, your career's over. And if captains aren't allowed to make decisions and command staff aren't allowed to make decisions by their chief, then the simple answer is no.
Yeah.
Always. And that's got to be a culture change from the chief down. The chief needs to let the assistant chiefs and the deputy chiefs know, don't micromanage your captains. When I came on, captains were gods. Bureaus didn't call captains and say, what are you doing with this? What are you doing with that? Because the captain generally would tell them to fuck off. It's my division, I'll run it.
Yeah.
And I think we need to get back to that. If we have any intent of teaching our sergeants and our lieutenants to be field leaders, they have to be allowed to make decisions, and then have their people above them stand by them if the decision's wrong.
Yeah.
So it's a big ask, though.
Yeah, there's a lot of supervisors calling the inside line when we don't have time for that. It's very interesting to see that happening with more time on. I'm like, why are they?
Yeah.
I understand why they're calling.
No. And I used to, when I was in AWC at 77th, I would have boot sergeants call me. I even had, P2s and P3s calling me. And I always told them the same thing. The P2s, I would say, why are you calling the watch commander asking this question? Have you not sought out a senior P2 first, and then a P3, and then your field sergeant?
Yeah.
That's not my job. And when sergeants would call me, I would tell them the same thing. Don't ever call me. Yeah. Make a decision, do the right thing. Call me for the things that need notifications. But other than that, learn your trade and do your job.
Yeah, I feel like a lot of it is also, it's almost like, correct me if I'm wrong, like our policies almost dictated by outsiders.
True.
Which doesn't help, right? So kind of segueing into, if I name the chapters, do you know each title of the chapters?
I
Come
don't.
on.
No, I don't.
Chapter 12, The Bondsman.
Yeah.
Go over little things there, racism in ghettos, alcoholism, and just kind of segueing from what we're just talking about, like policy and HR. I feel like policy is dictated by outsiders, which is kind of weird. It's Like, how are we going to make policies for brain surgeons, right? It doesn't make sense. So, in that essence, I'd like to get your take on like HR and policy versus being able to do empathetic police work out there in the streets.
The policing is one of those funny businesses. I mean, like you said, nobody would ever tell a neurosurgeon. No bricklayer would tell a neurosurgeon how to do his job correctly. Not that cops are neurosurgeons, but it's one of those businesses where everybody has an opinion on the way it should be done. And to a degree, I believe that your police force absolutely should answer to your civilians, the same way I believe that your military should answer to your civilian oversight. The alternative is very scary, to have police officers that don't answer to civilians, that can run rampant and do what they want against citizens.
Right.
Same with the military. I mean, Harry Truman fired MacArthur because he didn't do what he told him, and it was a decision that history looks at very clearly as the right thing to do. I think the fact that we answer to civilians as the police commission appointed by the mayor, and the chief is appointed by the mayor now, is a double-edged sword. Because prior to Proposition F, when Daryl Gates was chief, and he didn't leave when they wanted him to because he had civil service protection. So they changed the city charter with Proposition F, which created a scenario where the mayor appointed the police chief. That's the exact same situation that we had under the Shaw regime here in Los Angeles when LAPD was famously corrupt. So, and then you look at Charlie Beck doing things at the bidding of Villaraigosa, like we're no longer going to impound cars for $12,500 because it's disproportionately affecting a percentage of his constituents. We don't make the law. The mayor doesn't make the law. We enforce it. If you want to change that law, you go to Sacramento and get the law changed. So I think it's, if the people in charge are interested in protecting the majority of the public, then it can be a good thing. If the people in charge are interested in playing politics with the police department, then it becomes a bad thing.
So, how do you tell a young, motivated cop to do empathetic police work with those barriers? What very motivated, right? Without just slapping them down.
Well, what I used to tell my coppers, and this was all under Garcetti, from the 2020s and, the 2020 debacle from the George Floyd incident, and how we were being called, murderers by our politicians and all those things. And when we had George Gascon in charge of the DA's office, when it basically just really became catch and release for my cops, I would tell them in roll call that 90%, this is 77th Street, but it's applicable in every division, 90% of the people that live in our division are good, hard-working, blue-collar people. And they deserve you keeping your oath. You swore an oath to protect and to serve, and it didn't come with a caveat that things needed to be politically just right for you to do so. The 10% preys on the 90%, and they're well represented by politicians and pro bono lawyers and all those other people, activists and things. We represent the 90%. So keep in mind that when you go out on patrol, that you're working for the good, hardworking people in the city, the quiet or the quiet majority. And that's how I would motivate them, and remind them that theirs is a noble profession, and they chose it, and because they chose it, they need to do it. They swore an oath to do it.
Yeah, so, I could see how that message, consistently roll calls, could help the coppers out for sure.
Yeah, and I told the guys, don't worry about the DA. That's not your job. Your job is to catch them. The DA's job is to clean them. If the DA wants to throw them back in the water, cool, catch them again next week.
Yeah.
And that's all we can do.
Right. I think that's kind of a quiet stressor that builds on cops that stay on the street for a long time, for sure, where they become like, well, they don't want us here. Just real statements that they didn't become cops and have those attitudes, right? I think it kind of just, they become that because of these things. Also in Chapter 12, you touched on alcoholism. Do you think that the department is doing enough for alcoholism or mental illness?
You know, this is I mean, if you read Wambaugh's old stuff, this has been going on from the beginning of time.
Yeah.
I think the department does more today than it has ever done. When you talk about BSS and when you talk about behavioral science section and when you talk about, you know, getting folks treatment, for instance, through the league's program, we have a contract with somebody called the Holman Group, which is out, you know, psychiatric care and family care that's outside the scope of the department. There's definitely less of a stigma for seeking help now than there was when I came on the job. When I came on the job, it was go have cocktails and that was it, and,
Right.
and you know, decompress at the bar.
Yeah.
And I don't know. I think you know, I've got a good friend of mine, Teddy Williams from 77 Days, also ended up at Wilshire. Similar circumstances. He talked about all cops have PTSD. We just don't recognize it or think about it because, again, you see so much death, you see so much human depravity, you see so much, you know, so many crazy things that over the course of a career or even just one at a time, that there's no way you couldn't be affected by it. And we tend to pack it down inside and keep going. And
Yeah.
that's what happens. And oftentimes, you know, cops are heavy drinking people. They're type A personalities, typically. There is no problem. I've always maintained, I think that socialization and alcohol properly used is a great thing. Having
Yeah.
beers with your friends and decompressing over beers there's nothing wrong with it. It's when the officer gets eaten by the beast, when alcohol takes over their life or screws up their life, that things become a problem. You know,
Yeah.
and that manifests itself in 2735s and 243-1s and deuces and all of those career ending and family ending issues
Yeah.
that, you know, that cops typically take advantage of the things that are offered to them only after they've been pinched. And, you know, but again, the department goes out of their way to let guys know, hey, you know, we have all these avenues for help. Please take advantage of them. They come to roll calls, they talk about it and things like that. The league has a rideshare program that, you know,
How much is it being used?
quite a bit, quite a bit. Yeah, a lot of coppers use it, and it's, you know, it's basically we reimburse you for Uber rides.
Yeah.
And it's, you know, it's a good thing, but you know, since the beginning of this year, we've had what 7, 8 deuces
Yep.
already.
Yeah.
You
They
know,
gave us the count the other day in roll call.
Yeah, so it's definitely being talked about more, and there's more action and more help in place than there ever has been. But I still think that there's more to do without question.
I think right around 2014 and 15, 2014, we lost 3 officers in the line of duty. I started seeing it catch up with me, and I did a lot of self work to get around that. And you're right that we have a ton of more resources now than we did like in the 80s, right?
Sure.
But it's interesting that when I bring it up to my coworkers, like that culture is still strong.
Oh yeah.
And I wonder if, tell me what you think. I wonder if it's almost like if we allow ourselves to be soft, if you will, or have feelings, that'll work against us in the moment of maybe an OIS or just in the chaos, right, of the battlefield. So I'm having an issue trying to figure out how to, like, where is, I feel like there's no gray area. Is there? Should there be? Would that make the citizens more at danger because you don't have cops reacting like they should? Does that make sense? Like what?
Yeah, I don't know if that's a substance abuse problem or a psychiatric problem. I think, quite frankly, the departments, the policies that we've put in place
Yeah.
are, in many cases, very, very much endangering the public. I mean, when you have officers de-escalating situations where they de-escalate someone to death, that's a huge issue. And we've created a scenario, especially with the younger generation, where guys are afraid to use the appropriate amount of force for a given situation, and they fear the Monday morning quarterbacking by the department, and they don't recognize that force is a de-escalation tool. It's a last resort. It's focused on the reverence for human life. But sometimes in this business, you have to fight people. And the best way to fight people is violently and viciously as possible, and then stop.
Right.
And that's what we get paid to do. I mean, that's the difference between the police and the public, is that the public doesn't stop kicking the shit out of somebody that they're mad at.
Yeah.
We have to. And that's the difference. So I would say that, a lot of our force policies and our quote unquote de-escalation, like the patrol acronym, we've been utilizing de-escalation techniques from the beginning of time. When I came on, it was ask, tell, make. Mm-hmm. And we asked you nicely, then we told you, and then we made you. Yeah. And by doing that, we gave you every opportunity to comply. Then we ordered you to comply with the law, and then we made you. And that was very much the same as the patrol acronym.
Yeah.
But, I think it's a department issue more than anything.
Yeah, there seems to be more, especially with P1s now, there's more fear than confidence.
Yeah.
And it feels almost impossible to teach that confidence or instill it. I don't know. And the policies don't help. I think that de-escalation, it's like going into searching a room with a beanbag.
Yeah, right.
That you don't do that, right? So people are going in, and correct me if I'm wrong, or from your experience, going into a scenario with de-escalation as the first thing in your mind puts you at danger, I think.
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know, I was the last generation of police officers that were trained and supervised by the Vietnam era guys. Mm. And those guys I was taught, you go home at the end of the day. Right. First and foremost, you take care of yourself and your partner. Then you worried about the policies and everything else. Obviously, that is probably, obviously, that's not the answer either. There needs to be the mindset where you're perfectly willing, and I don't know, there's, again, different people that talk about this in the military world, is be perfectly willing to kill everyone you meet.
Yeah.
And have a plan to do so. Yeah. Knowing that you won't ever have to, and won't have to 99.99% of the time. Yeah. But when it comes time to use force, you must do so decisively. And in my opinion, that's an education issue. If you know the force policy, same as if you know the pursuit policy or the body-worn policy. Yeah. Those were the three policies that I drove into my guys day in, day out. You'd have to know the use of force policy, you have to know the pursuit policy, and you have to know the body-worn video policy, because those are the three that will mess you up in patrol.
Right. Yeah, I've noticed after my OIS, I noticed how a lot of the way I was training for things kind of just came apart. Not that they were wrong, it just, there's so much happening. Yeah. It just kind of came apart. A mantra that I've kind of established for myself after that, and I'm trying to give, is just the mindset is everything, and I don't think we have that. So what I like to tell myself is you have to want to get into that OIS that you hope to God you never get into.
I know what you mean. That's probably not the right way to put it, but I know what you mean. It's you have to be mentally prepared. And I think, in all fairness, I think that has gone by the wayside considerably since 2020, where people are just, they don't care anymore. And it's not everybody, and it's not everywhere. There's always been slugs and slaps in every division from the beginning of time. I think they grew exponentially based on the excuse of, like you said earlier, well, if they don't want me to do anything, I'm not going to do anything. Yeah. And personally, I find that to be unethical. I think, again, you swore an oath, and your oath didn't come with a caveat. Yeah. The reality of being prepared mentally is something that we have completely gotten away from, and focused on the political correctness of de-escalation versus the practical aspects of de-escalation, which include using force.
Yeah. And when I say want in my little mantra, I don't mean I want to go.
No, I understand. Yeah.
But just that, having that hard set, you have to want it, because then you'll train like it. Yeah. But you also have to hope you never get into it. And
you play like you practice.
Yeah. That's 100%. It's 100%. I take some pride in my mind state and taking things serious. And when I got into my OIS, I was I get some accolades on how I reacted,
Hmm.
but I can't even say, "Oh, thanks for it." I was a robot.
Yeah.
I was sitting behind my eyes, just watching myself make decisions. It was very interesting.
Yeah, and I've never, knock on wood, I've never had to use deadly force. I've been there many times when it's been used.
Yeah,
I've been around a lot, and it's pure luck considering where I worked. I mean, I have a lot of friends that turn corners right into shootings, more
yeah,
than once, and it's just sometimes it's luck of the draw,
yeah,
and most every time actually it's luck of the draw. I mean, we obviously are reactionary to people's behavior,
yeah,
but yeah, I don't know. I'm no super tactician, but I managed to stay alive for 20 years working in down south. So
yeah. I think another good culture change would be. It's weird that again, just coming back to my OIS because I learned a lot from that. There was this interesting heroism effect that of who I became and how people looked at me and spoke to me.
hmm,
And it's almost like it's going to sound bad maybe, but almost like people they see someone who just got an OIS or gotten a good one or gotten two or three, and they're like they look up to them in a kind
yeah.
of a hero kind of way. I don't think it's a looking up for them because they use deadly force. It's more of a holy shit that officer did what I might have to do one day. Almost like a nervous
and
laugh,
and made
you
it
know?
out and made it out the other side.
Right.
Yeah, I know. I
Right.
understand that. That's the perhaps the hero worship of performance
Yeah.
under the most stressful conditions that can be
Yeah.
imagined.
Right. Speaking of all that stress, I'm telling you, I wish I could go over every single chapter here with you, but you have chapter 22, which is Open Your Eyes, and it leads to 26 and 27. You titled them The Aftermath and Direction. Goes a lot into like identity and retirement, your inner battles, how we fade away. I'm using some of your words here, I think, and just really the stress of the work. With time, I started to figure out, well, I need to slow down that wave that's coming towards me, right? With all your experience, what do you think would be a good way to navigate prepping for all that stress? Advice for a young cop
You mean the
who,
stress of it ending, the career ending, or
I think the transition and the it should be a weaning off of all that stress, but it's
hmm.
not. It's usually just it just stops, right? How can a younger copper stay motivated and stay with the right mindset? And how can they prepare early for that transition later?
It's funny because I look at guys that stayed in the field their whole career and timed out right at the end. If you stay too long, you tend to die young. Especially the guys that come off patrol, that spend a whole bunch of time on patrol. There is definitely something to be said for as your career advances, to be looking for those jobs that create less stress. And we have 10,000 people, so there's, I don't know, 2,500 on patrol, so that
Yeah,
means there's
plenty.
7,500 where you don't ever have to be a cop again,
Yeah,
basically. I'm always fascinated by people that I ask them, hey, close to retirement, what's your plan? And they say, I really don't have a plan. And all I can think to myself is that is the single worst thing I can imagine is not having a plan. We plan for, like you said, we plan tactically. We plan for the weekends. We plan, family events. We plan everything constantly.
yeah,
And then to think that this goes on forever, I can tell you firsthand. I was a P2 yesterday in 1994, and I am dropping out in 4 years now. So my career is essentially over 30 years, went in a blink of an eye.
yeah,
And, I'm in construction. I've got a general contractor's license. I built my whole life. I'm a cabinet maker by trade. Our plan is to go to Idaho and build, and I'll work until the day I die.
hmm
I can't imagine being done with my job and then not working.
Yeah.
And I think that's super unhealthy. And I think that people that don't have hobbies or distractions are asking for alcoholism and asking for, early stress death. It's just it. So for the young cops, I would tell them, most of my friends, I have lots of good friends on this job, people that I've known, but they're work friends. Almost every one of my real friends has nothing to do with law enforcement. The people that I grew up with, that I've always stayed in touch, and your family is what is important, because none of it is permanent.
Yeah.
And the older you get, the more you begin to see that. And I would just say to the young cops is that most assuredly, I think physical fitness is probably the best outlet for stress, but also not. And I don't know about hobbies and that kind of thing, but hobbies are important. But I think really most importantly is have some sort of a long-term plan that you start thinking about 20 years before you retire, about where you might want to go and what you might want to do, and spend your vacations exploring places and things like that.
I like it. So is there another book coming?
Oh man, in my spare time, I've got
1,000 books in your head?
Yeah, I've got 1,000 books in my head for sure.
Yeah.
But nowadays, I've got little tiny babies. I've got a 25-year-old, a 22-year-old, a 4-year-old, a 3-year-old, and a 1-year-old.
Oh, there you go.
So my life is remarkably busy right now. So I don't know. I want to try and figure out a time, because writing is very cathartic for me. It gives me, it lets me put down. The beauty of writing historical fiction is that you can tell the truth while denying its truth. So, my view is that I definitely have more things to tell.
For sure.
Yeah.
Waiting for part 2. see what he did with his money.
Yeah.
Never
even thought about that.
No, not even there. No. I'm already ready for it.
I've got a prequel in my head, actually.
Yeah. No, it was a really good book. I don't, like I said, it's hard for me to read. I forced myself to read, and this was an easy read, in a good way.
Yeah.
So I appreciate you writing this. I wish you would promote it more. I didn't know about it until I think Dave Martinez told me about it.
Oh, that's funny.
So.
Yeah, no, man. I don't know, dude. I have a hard time with self-promotion, quite frankly. Most of us do. I think most normal humans do. I think unless you're some sort of narcissist, you have a hard time telling people how good you are.
Yeah,
or what your accomplishments are, what you've done. It's hard to interview. It's hard to talk about your achievements.
Yeah.
So.
Well, this is a good book. I learned a lot. Like I said, you see the things I'm asking you now. I could get deeper into it, but Are you? How many people do you know have read it on LAPD?
Oh, I don't know. I don't.
You're not tracking that at all. Nothing.
Not at all.
Do you know your book sales?
I don't.
Really?
No, not very many. I mean, nobody buys stuff off Amazon. I mean, anybody that tells you they write fiction for any reason other than to become a millionaire is a liar.
Yeah.
And if 10 million of you and your best friends would buy the book, I could retire instead of doing 4 more years. But I mean, at the end of the day, I don't really care what its sales would be or any of that kind of stuff. What I care about is that the people that do read it see themselves in it and enjoy it, and maybe it gives them just a little picture of them to be able to tell their friends, hey, this is what it was like.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Does that make
sense?
sense?
I think you did a good job of that.
Well, that's what I hope.
Yeah. More people need to read it. For sure. Do you get, every sale, do you get money from it still?
I don't know.
Really?
To be honest with you, I haven't gotten a check that I would have noticed. How about that?
All right.
Book Baby sends you, or maybe, I don't know, maybe through, I think it's Book Baby that sends you residual checks.
Yeah.
But like I said, never got a check that I was like, holy shit, somebody read the book.
So you just wrote it and I'm done.
Kind of, yeah, almost exactly.
That's good. That's actually tells a lot about the why you wrote it. So it's a good book. Thanks for your time.
No worries, man.
This was great. Thanks for letting me read your book and talking about it. You're gonna have to sign this for me because one day it's gonna be worth money.
Don't hold your breath.
Yeah. Well, at the end of every podcast, I always like to ask my guest if they want to dedicate the podcast to a fallen officer.
Yeah, I mean, for me, the most poignant and memorable death of an officer in the line of duty was Ricardo Lizarraga. It was February 2004. He was assigned to Newton, but he had just left 77th. He was a P1 on my watch. All of my friends were his P3s. He was one of those kids that was super, super solid. You know, I mean, 20 years ago, the probationers were different, you know, but there was always some that were, you know, clearly not made to do the job, and others that were clearly made to do the job. And Lizarraga was one of those kids that nobody ever worried about. He was clearly learning everything he was supposed to learn. He was good at it. He was humble. He was smart. He was a good cop. And I remember going to work that next night, and just there was a shadow over the division. Because he was killed in 77th. He was in Newton going to a call, and it was up in the 40s that he got flagged down, and just got shot by a gangster, and you know, trying to do the right thing, trying to defuse a domestic, typical. But that was the last line of duty funeral that I've ever gone to, and it was memorable. So I think if I'm dedicating it to anybody, it's the memory of Ricardo Lizarraga.